Good morning, good afternoon, welcome, and thank you all for joining us for today's webinar, The Value of the Concession Model, Best Practice Examples from Around the World. I'm René Moser, Senior EU International Affairs Manager at ASFINAG, the Austrian highway operator. Since July, I have also the pleasure and privilege to serve as International Vice President of IPTTA. For those of you who are not familiar with IPTTA and its International Committee, I would like to give you a brief overview of IPTTA. IPTTA is the global organization for the owners and operators of toll facilities and the businesses that serve them. One of IPTTA's priorities is to provide a platform for sharing knowledge, information, and expertise on the range of relevant topics affecting the operations and governance of the worldwide tolling industry. The IPTTA International Committee works to keep and maintain the link with IPTTA members from all over the globe. From that perspective, the International Committee is presenting a series of webinars to encourage members to share information on a variety of topics. Today, we are speaking about a very relevant issue for our industry, the value of the concession model. I'm convinced that concession schemes are an important tool to manage and further extend road infrastructures. Concession schemes are a perfect tool to stimulate public-private partnerships, to ensure investments when public resources are limited, and the models can work during good economic times as well as in difficult times like we are all experiencing today. Before I turn the webinar over to Malika and our panelists, I would like to go over some logistics for this Zoom webinar. Next. This webinar will last 75 minutes. There will be 4 presenters. All participants are in listen and view only mode. We encourage you to ask questions via the chat button at the bottom of your screen. Please address your questions to all panelists and attendees. We will be answering questions at the end of all the presentations. We are also recording this webinar and it will be posted on the IPTTA website. Next slide. I'm very pleased to introduce our moderator, my good friend Malika Sedi. Malika is the newly appointed Secretary General of ASECAP, the European Association of Highway Concessionaires, based in Brussels. Before Malika took over her new post, she was a director with ASFA in Paris for many years, and she was my predecessor at IPTTA, serving in the role of International Vice President for many years. Finally, I want to thank all of our international speakers for their willingness to share their expertise with us. And I want to thank the whole IPTTA team for their great support in putting together today's webinar. I'm truly looking forward to meeting all of you in person again soon. But in the meantime, I hope you enjoy this exciting webinar. So let's get started. Malika, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, René, for the kind introduction. And good morning, good afternoon, everyone. We are today, since the latest figures that we have, we should be around 245 participants registered. I'm very pleased to moderate this session dedicated to concession model. And this subject is a topic that the IPTTA board members wanted to address, and that in general, that could be better understand the value that this model brings to the industry. I'm also very excited to introduce you to our distinguished presenters. But first, I would like to share with you the map that you have in front of you to give you a sense of where you will find concession projects around the world. This map has been prepared by and extracted from data in Toll Miners, which is the IPTTA's visualization product. And I encourage you to explore it. As you can see, the concession model and P3 are largely used worldwide. We are all aware that it is a really critical time for our industry today. Infrastructure needs all over the world are critical, and there is also a very important lack of public funding. So more than ever, the new models are needed to develop road network and other mobility options. One of these highly successful models developed using private financing via concession models has been implemented in all over the world. And in Europe, for instance, we have more than 50,000 kilometers that has been built thanks to these models. So you can see here, as I said before, the development all over the world. And today's webinar, you will hear perspective and example from all over the globe. And you will have today 4 experts that I'm delighted to welcome in our panels that will provide you international perspectives and insights. So our first presenters of today is Bruno de la Fuente. Bruno is the Executive Director of CEOPAN and is also the chair of the concession committee in ASECAP. He's from Madrid, Spain, and he will present the manifesto strategy developed, which describes the value of the concession model. Our next presenter will be Christophe Boutin. Christophe is the Executive Director of ASFA and is also the President of ASECAP. And Christophe is based in Paris, and he will focus on how tolls can be used to enhance mobility services. Our third speaker is Julia Monzo. Julia is the Vice President of Toll Operation for Sintra US. He's based in Austin, Texas, and he will provide details on multiple US concession projects that Sintra has developed over the years. And our final presenter is Vaibhav Danj from India, so very far away. Vaibhav is the advisor from the Ministry of Road, Transport and Highway at NHAI, and Vaibhav will describe the national plan for highway infrastructure in India using P3 and concession model. So now it is my pleasure to turn to our Bruno. Bruno, please take yourself on mute, and the floor is yours. Thanks, Bruno.
Thank you very much, Malika and René, for the introduction, and congratulations to IBTTA for organizing this interesting webinar. As Malika said, I'm here to present the ASECAP manifesto on toll road concessions. With this document, the ASECAP board wants to show how toll concession, a model to design, finance, build, and operate and maintain roads, which has been successfully deployed during the second half of the past century, is still not only a valid, but also a great solution to face massive investments in the new sustainable, green, digital, and social context defined by the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the European Green Deal, and the 2030 Agenda. Next slide, please. Sustainable growth is not only a trendy term, but also a concrete objective and a global priority for all governments. It entails a new economic, social, and environmental approach for any policy and decision to be made. In economic terms, we need to boost our economies, providing reliable and efficient road networks that foster mobility and commercial exchange and generate employment and fiscal revenues without jeopardizing public accounts. In environmental terms, we need to promote greener mobility and to move toward real decarbonization of our road transport. In social terms, we need to improve on road safety and reduce fatalities while increasing mobility. Toll concessions based on user-based principles can address all these challenges. The extension, improvement, and upgrading of our roads network through the implementation of smart tolling system may be beneficial in all these aspects. Next slide, please. As you can see in the slide, toll concessions have already contributed greatly to our society. In Europe, from 6 to 7 billion euros are invested every year, on toll motorways. They generate 5 billion euros from VAT, save 12 billion euros of public funding, generate 48,000 jobs, while facilities in the network were reduced by 64% in the period 2001-2017. Next slide. The manifesto also highlights some of the most important benefits of toll concessions. First, tolls can cut down on public expenses. This is especially relevant in the current situation with a constant increase of social expenses to face other priorities as health, education, or social protection. In the graph, you can see how social expenses have increased in the EU over the last 17 years. Second, they provide risk allocation efficiencies between public and private sector. These make it cheaper when we compare concession to the traditional model, which includes the construction and further different O&M contracts. In the graph shown in the slide, you can see the comparison of cost in terms of net present value and how PPPs generate value for money. Next slide, please. Third, it allows a quicker execution of roads and so the anticipation of the social benefits. New motorway may have important social benefits in terms of time savings, improvement of road safety, savings of operational costs, which will be postponed if we have to wait until we have public funds available to face the investment. In the case of Spain, as an example, it is estimated that the construction of a new road can be anticipated by 8 years in average if it's financed through concessions. Fourth, it guarantees the proper maintenance of road, which, as you can see in the slide, has dropped dramatically from 2006. The reason behind this fact is the dependency of road maintenance budget on public fundings. Next slide, please. Fifth, concession benefit from an efficient management based on incentives to respect timings and budgets, on revenues directly linked to the efficiency and quality of the roads, on the global vision of the entire life cycle of the infrastructure, on more flexibility to react to challenge in the overall economical situation, on innovation, and on less contract to be managed by road administrations. Finally, toll concessions have a clear user and service orientation. They are equipped with ITS and other cutting-edge technology. They are fully involved in the development of connected and autonomous vehicles. You can see in the screen some logo of the project where we are involved. And they perform constant user satisfaction surveys, traffic monitoring, and awareness campaigns. Next slide, please. This manifesto underlines that toll concessions are a full tool to allow massive investment that are still needed and answer Green Deal goals. Many measures can be implemented based on the tolling model to fight against climate change, to reduce the transport carbon footprint and preserve environment and fauna, to promote the use of electric car by using smart tolling, to foster mobility sharing by creating carpooling parkings, to develop reserve collective uses of infrastructure, to adapt existing motorways to host new mobility options, to set up a recycling system to collect and treat garbage, to improve environmental integration, to create specific facilities to allow the movement of the fauna, to restore the ecological continuity, to set up, deploy system to collect used water. Next slide, please. To sum up, this manifesto underlines that in the new context of climate and sustainable challenges, with scarce state financing and an increase of social priorities, we still have huge need of investment to complete, enlarge, upgrade, and maintain our road network. In this new scenario, toll concessions are still an efficient way to face this investment based on basic principles as user pays and polluter pays, and targeting the user by offering added value services. Therefore, we ask for a stronger commitment from our administration to promote and support this model for a wider use. We also ask them to maximize the benefit of the tolling concession model by building a reliable scheme providing legal certainty and predictability, fair balanced risk allocation between the stakeholders, and promoting fair competition with other transport modes. To conclude my presentation, I would like to say that this manifesto elaborated by ASECAP has also been explicitly endorsed by other important associations, such as IBTTA, the International Road Federation, or E3PO, meaning that tolls have a great support from all around the world. I would like to make a final statement. In this new Green Deal environment that has been conceived, roads has been undermined in favor of other transport modes, theoretically less polluting and safer. The COVID pandemic that has an impact to all of us has demonstrated that at the peak of the crisis, roads were the only reliable transport mode to guarantee mobility and supplying of goods. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bruno. I think it's always good to recall the value of concession model and to stress really the point that need to be addressed to highlight what all the benefits that can be taken from a good concession contract. So thank you, Bruno. I will now turn the floor to Christophe, our next presenter. We'll take the question at the end, as it has been said by René, and we have already some coming up. So Christophe, please, the floor is yours. Take yourself out of mute.
Yeah, thank you, Malika. And thank you, Bruno, for this very comprehensive presentation about the concession model as we see it in ASECAP. Some other consideration about the model that I can share with you in my presentation. So first slide, please. To remind, well, next slide, please. To remind you of what is a concession, it's actually just a tool at the disposal of a public procurement to decide on how to fund projects. As Bruno said it, there are some very impressive advantage to tap this tool, such as the rapidity of execution of projects. 8 years of advance for road that is built in Spain ahead of regular procurement is really a very important item to show to taxpayers so that they understand that it's a very efficient tool. With a concession contract, of course, you associate tolling, and then the project gets financed by users instead of taxpayers. This is very important in many countries in Europe, such as France, which I represent here, because we have a lot of traffic transiting through the country, and then it seems to be fairer than users from the infrastructure instead of taxpayers. It enables, of course, private sector involvement with all its capacities to fine-tune the projects. And at the end of the contract, the public entity gets the ownership of the infrastructure back and can decide what it does with it. And it's not a theoretical case. It has happened in some countries in Europe. For some countries, it has been decided to procure the contract again to a new entity in charge of the maintenance of the infrastructure. And in some other countries, the state has decided to take the infrastructure for itself and will decide in the future the way it would fund for its maintenance. As you can see on the slide, this is not a new model. It has been existing actually for some centuries. We can even go back to Roman times if we want, but to be more serious, we can see that we still have examples of infrastructures that were built through concession contracts, which are active in Europe, such as canals, bridge, public lighting, water dams, mass transit, and railways. And of course, no highways. Highways have started to be procured through concession contract in France in the 60s, and they have enabled a good equipment of the territory with those infrastructures. Next slide, please. So what are the main advantages of the concession contract for the public side? First of all, it guarantees earmarking of funding for the infrastructure. This is very important because we otherwise see that when infrastructure is built in Europe, very often it is subject to budgetary arbitrage, which are not in favor of maintenance contracts. And over the time, you can see infrastructures that get in less better shape than they were supposed to be. And probably you've heard stories of some infrastructure having deteriorated very much all over your different countries, and it happens also in Europe. So dedicated fundings, investments are all included in the contracts, and we have a long-term financial management capacity of the operator of the contract. The contract generally includes some quality indicators that are part of the contract, and if you don't respect those indicators, then you get financial penalties. And this is a very also convenient tool for the government to supervise the life of the asset. You have controls which are possible through the contract, quality indicators for the infrastructure, and if you don't respect the contract and the controls, then you are subject to penalties or even to cancellation of the contract. So you better have to comply to the contract. Next slide. Just a short overview of what it means tolling, concession tolling in Europe. You can see all the countries which are part of ASECAP. ASECAP all together is a network approximately of 55 miles over Europe. But I won't get too long on that slide, since Bruno has shown most of achievement of concession contracts in Europe. What is interesting also in the next slide, you will see, is that the concession is a tool that is still relevant for funding the future needs for mobility. As Bruno said it, there are still existing infrastructures to be built, and also adaptation of existing infrastructures for the future mobilities. Shared mobilities, we want to develop reserve lane, managed lane, like it exists a lot in the United States, and which are seldomly developed in Europe. We can even fund for park and ride facilities, multimodal facilities, because we consider that those services are integrated into the infrastructure, and it makes sense that toll is also used to fund for people who make the effort of letting their car in parking facilities to alleviate congestion and to alleviate pollution into city centers. We want also to fund for electric mobility, because we firmly believe that there is no economic model for the moment for fast charge facilities which are on our motorways. Those facilities are used only for some specific journeys, which are not the journeys that people are doing every day. So the number of charges that are done on those facilities are not sufficient to fund for them. And we believe that they can be included in the concession contract as part of the infrastructure facilities, and then the economic model will be funded. And we also, of course, want to fund for digital mobility, let's call it like that, which I understand as being the way to accept on our facilities automated cars, connected cars first, and also to develop free-flow tolling, which is a challenge ahead of us in Europe, a challenge that many of you in the US have already successfully done, but we want to develop that in Europe, in a continent where you have a lot of countries, some of them not very big, and you can transit through them very quickly. So if we want to do that without losing too much toll, it's still a challenge. And of course, we want also to use a concession tool to fund for existing needs which are not met. We know that the network, the road network, which is not under concession, has maintenance needs which are not funded. Budget constraints are not likely to soften, and we believe that the government could use a concession contracts, existing concession contract, to fund for those needs. I mean, as I said in the beginning of this presentation, many contracts are now mature and are approaching the end of the contract. So we recommend that the concession still goes for some years, and that the money is not used only to finance for maintenance of the existing concession, but can be also used to fund for maintenance of adjacent networks, so that the burden of public budget is relieved in some ways. So that's why we believe that our concession model has a lot of future ahead of it. And we firmly believe that as it was a very successful tool to build a network that is serving Europe, we believe it can still be very up to date for the future years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christophe. I think providing information that the concession model is a clear earmarking to fund infrastructure, dedicated fundings, and also an answer to provide to finance new mobility needs is something that should be considered. So I will now pass to our next presenter, Julia Monzo. Please, Julia, take yourself off mute, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, Malika. And let me start by thanking the International Committee to allow us to make this presentation. It's always exciting and nice to talk about P3s and what has been done here in the US. I think that there's a lot to talk, a lot to discuss, and a lot to learn. And next slide, please. I would like to start by showing you that timeline that you have on the bottom left. And I guess that you will agree with me that that doesn't intend to be a comprehensive view of all the projects that have been implemented here in the US, but I think that it gives a hint of two things. The first, the long-term record that we have on P3 in the US, and second, the multiple variety of schemas that have been implemented here in the US. And starting by 1993, SR 191 was the first P3 project in the US. And in fact, if you realize that happened a couple of years before some iconic projects in the world, especially the 407 in Toronto or the CityLink in Australia. So we could very well say that SR 91 was a pioneer on P3 in multiple places of the world. During the first half of the 2000, I would say from 2000 to 2005, 2006, most of those projects were brownfields until we get to pure traffic management projects that start happening between 2007 and 2009, when the 495 project was awarded, as well as the LBJ project in Dallas-Fort Worth. And in fact, 2009 was a quite exciting year as well, because there were a couple of projects, the Mid-Corridor Bridge, which was developed by using a PDA agreement where the private partner was involved prior to the environmental approval being achieved, and the 595 project that together with the tunnel of the Port of Miami were the first two developed under an availability process. So since then, since 2009 to, I would say, up until now, there have been plenty of projects which have been pushed by traffic risk options. And in particular, one of them, which is I-66, which is the one I'm gonna show you to make a showcase for how those projects can be implemented by using P3 schema. So at the end of the day, I think that that shows that there has been a lot of experience in the US by using multiple different approaches. Some of these which have succeeded, and some others which have not, as in any other industry. So I would think that that's different what happens in any other environment. If you see the map on the right-hand side, you see as most of the states currently have either total or partial status supporting the development of P3. And for those of you that met the development project, 2009 have been the National Governance Association, I think that you will agree with me, and there's a lot of traction for the type of projects. So I think that that's the summary of where we are and how we get where we are up to now here in the US. So please, next slide. When reading the introduction to this seminar, I realized that we're talking a lot about the lack of public funding. And in fact, on my previous presentations, we have also seen that P3s are an alternative where there's that lack of public funding. But at the end of the day, our view is that the real value of P3s lies in bringing private ingenuity. Bringing private ingenuity with the final goal to enhance the value of the project. That's the real goal of bringing P3 in. And that requires that we need to squeeze all the letters of the DVFOM acronym. So we need a design which first is able to identify underserved customers, and within the confines of the right of way, it tries how to serve better those guys, probably increasing the value, probably increasing the cost of the project, but at the end of the day, increase the total value of the project along the whole concession period. A construction which allows to keep traffic flowing during the construction period, keeping the maintenance of traffic, but at the end of the day, it allows us to open the project earlier than anticipated. Financing by accepting a proper financing structure, and finally, an O&M which reduces the total cost of ownership during the whole concession period and takes the project back to the handback of the public authority as established in the contract. So at the end of the day, I think that when we talk, and I think that's really important, when we talk about P3, when we talk about concessions, we're talking far beyond the financing of the infrastructure. We're talking to enhance the value of that project as much as possible by using multiple approaches to multiple problems. And I think that I-66 exemplifies this goal that I'm talking about. I-66 is a project, as you can see below, has a 2.3 billion construction budget. It's 35 miles, which is the west access to the city of Washington, DC. The idea of the project is to move the general purpose to the outer side of the right-of-way, making a space for the 2+2 managed lanes on each direction, express lanes on each direction. That project was awarded on 2016 for a 50 years concession period, and it expects to have an opening date 2022. So with all those features, what I'm talking about speaks by itself, and that's a table that you see on the top right-hand side. Initially, that project, as I said before, had a construction budget of $2.3 billion, and the estimation of the public agency was that the private partners could expect to have a public subsidy up to $600 million to build, to operate for 50 years the project. At the end of the bidding process, the result was that those $600 million in public subsidy were replaced by an upfront payment which was almost the same value, $575 million. And then on top of this, the private partner was able to make room for $800 million in public transit improvements during the whole period of the project, plus another $300 million in transportation improvements in the corridor. So I think that speaks by itself. That's a result of increasing the value of the project, and that value of the project goes far beyond the financing. And the code you see on the bottom part, I think that perfectly summarizes, and that's a testament to the value of P3 and the type of projects. So according to the words of the BDOT P3 executive, the project that was presented by the developer increased the capacity by 11%. Obviously, that required also increase the project budget for the construction, but at the end of the day, the whole value of the project and the capability of the project to better serve those underserved users was better, the customer satisfaction was increased, and at the end of the day, the public was better served and the value of the project was significantly increased. So I think that code that you see below is a testament to the importance of that type of structures when it comes to push for those large projects. Next slide, please. And finally, I would say that I'm going to echo something that I did hear several times on Christopher's presentation. I mean, private innovation and ingenuity can be maximized at the time where the uncertainties, the opportunities for change, and the project complexity escalates and open holes for improvement and for upsides. So I think that the more we have of those, the more room we have for private partners to increase the value of those projects. And those holes are currently in abundance on the current market. I mean, if we just consider the triple revolution, but share electric and automated vehicles, or we see the eruption of new newcomers into the marketplace, new travel patterns, which are the result of COVID-19, or finally, why not, the new taxation methods, vehicle mileage travels that is increasingly discussed as a way to replace the gas tax, or even congestion pricing schemes as the one used in New York. So all those things will open holes for private innovation, providing ingenuity to bring even more value to those projects by merging infrastructure with digital layers. And that's related to what you see in the bottom, either involving new strategies to manage curb in urban areas, or even deploying technology like vehicle-to-vehicle, G5, edge computing with a neutral host, which are going to be able to merge different technologies to support the deployment of connected autonomous vehicles. Why not the infrastructure to support the deployment of autonomous vehicles, either to maintain them, to storage, to charge them, or why not staging facilities that will allow them to wait for their passengers, or finally, mobile hubs, which will combine the last mile with the long distance traveling. So all those things, I think that in the future will be more and more merged with the pure infrastructure and will open new avenues for the private initiative to improve the value of those projects. So I would say that as a summary, three different issues to summarize what my messages are in this presentation. First is that P3 have had long-term record. Second, that there's a lot to support and to do in the future, and the current conditions increase the possibility for public infrastructure to be financed by means of P3. And then the third, P3 goes far beyond the financing of the infrastructure, as there are many other features that contribute to increase the value of the project. So with this, I conclude my presentation, and I remain open for the Q&A session. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you very much, Julia, for having brought to us the SA66 project case studies. It's always good to hear and to learn from other projects, namely in the US, to see the development and also to stress the added value that also can provide the tool, as you mentioned, to boost innovation and to enhance mobility. So thank you very much, Julia. And I will now pass the floor to our last presenters from India, Vaibhav Danj. So Vaibhav, please take yourself off mute and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Malika. Good evening to everyone here from India. Indian highway sector, India being a huge country, Indian highway sector is also growing with the current needs. Next slide, please. I'll just like to put in some numbers to just give a perspective about India's highway sector. We have a second largest road network in the world. It's around 5.23 million kilometers, out of which this road network is divided into national highways and then the state highways and the local districts and other village roads. But the national highway is roughly around 2.5% of the total road length. But it carries around 40% of the traffic, and 65% of the freight and 80% of the passenger traffic is carried on this 135,000 kilometers of national highway. India has been fairly successful in implementing the P3 models in the highway development, the concessions. Different kind of PPP models have been tried in India. We have been the top recipients of the PPP funding in last 8 to 10 years. And in fact, Asia Development Bank has been ranking India as #1 into the PPP operation maturity on our, particularly on the highway sector, apart from other infrastructure sectors. But primarily on the highway sector, India has been fairly successful on the PPP model. Next slide, please. Again, to put that number, India's logistics cost is roughly around 40% of its GDP. It's roughly around 6% higher than the developing countries. So our highway development needs are much more higher. We are moving just from providing transport to moving country in a more efficient and better way. Government funding has increased in particularly from last 5 years. It has seen a phenomenal jump of 127% into the public funding into the road sector, highway sector. India's opportunities and in terms of needs, it's increasing. We are 4 million passenger car market. This year, we are already a 4 million passenger car market. So our needs are very high. We have a very different kind of terrains. We have a high Himalayan hills and we have a coastal, road. So very varied kind of networks, tunnel, bridges, those kind of networks we have, and those kind of area, contracts we are trying to address. Next slide, please. The construction rate in last few years has been very phenomenal. 2014, it was around 11 kilometers of national highways construction per day. It has increased to almost 30 kilometers of national highway being added every day. 30 kilometers per day is the construction of the national highways from last almost 2 years. So there is a phenomenal increase both in public and private sector investment. As you can see, public sector investment still is much more higher than the private sector investment, but all projects are implemented through various PPP models, whether it is design, build, operate, and toll, whether it is annuity, whether we have developed few new models which are very particular for our own country, and large is also on the EPC. So public funded and private investment both are happening. Our awards are virtually 10 to 15,000 kilometers of award happening every year. So we have a very ambitious program of building around 25,000 kilometers of highway in next 2 years. So phenomenal amount of investment happening on that part. Next slide, please. As you can see, a lot of intervention was done on the policy front. Concessioners have been given a lot of incentives in terms of they can divest their equity after 2 years of their BOT projects. They can securitize their projects more efficient so that the equity can be eased out and again put into the new projects. There were mechanisms brought in where stuck projects are taken out of the problem. The issues are resolved. The arbitration mechanisms on dispute resolution through the contract, concession dispute resolution, all these things have been brought in. Restructuring of premiums have been brought in so that the whole viability of the PPP projects increase and the private sector participation increase by doing that. Next slide, please. We have, as you can see, we have implemented a few of the biggest PPP projects in the country, probably in the world, of a huge size. These are few examples. Next slide, please. This is the biggest highway development program India is working on today for the next next 5 years. 2025 is the target to complete this program. As I said, the total opportunity is around 150 billion years. There are 4 major components of the program. Bharatmala is creating the entire highway network, expressway network, port connectivity. It's roughly around 44,000 kilometers, out of which around 25,000 kilometers will be built in next 3 years. Then we have 900 kilometers of hill connectivity, the entire hill roads connectivity. A lot of bridges are being built. Around 350 bridges are being built. All the railway crossings are being converted to the railway overbridge. Economic corridors have been identified to improve the logistics efficiency of the country. So, so many things have been put together into the entire program. And this program is envisaging investment of roughly around $150 billion. Next slide, please. As I said, this has been a standard model design. There are different stakeholders where a contractor, design consultant, independent engineers, they come together and a very robust system of implementing a PPP model. Next slide, please. As I said, we have 4 models, various models. I'll take a few seconds on a very India-specific model which we have developed in last 3 years. It is called as hybrid annuity model, in which 40% of the government support comes during the construction period, and remaining 60% comes through equal annuities over a period of concession. This model has been particularly targeted for the Indian PPP operators, so that they can leverage better opportunities. The market traffic risk is shifted to the government, and a lot of private investment can come in. So I think this model has been working very well. And of course, BOT toll, BOT annuity models are still there, they are working, but HAM model has been a major push through in the PPP in India. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. The objectives has been, of course, to attract private investment, risk handling, greater clarity in defining rights and obligation of various parties, try to reduce disputes. Next slide, please. Premium, grant, all those kind of revenue shortfall loans, sharing of traffic risk, capacity augmentation. The concessionaire have chance to invest again in capacity augmentation of the road from 4-lane to 6-lane, 6-lane to 8-lane. Those kind of things have been added. I think with the time constraint, I'll just run up. So, those kind of things have been added in the PPP mode. Next slide, please. All those things have been, the model concession agreement has been made very robust, so that all those kind of force measures, termination clauses, change of scope, change of law, everything can be addressed, and concessionaires are in a better place to, assess their risk. Next slide, please. This is the kind of investment India is looking at and how the risk has been shared. Next model, please. Next slide, please. As I said, this is the entire combination of $150 billion of investment, out of which around 60% of will come from the private sector. Next slide, please. As I said, this is the entire network that we are proposing. Next slide. These are the few initiatives which we have put in, looking at bringing in new technologies, better highway experience. We are also looking at adopting new technologies like electric highways. The pilots are being done on electric highways, creating logistic parks along the highways, green highways. The entire country is now electronically tolled. In a few probably years time, we'll be 100% electronically digitally tolled country. So those kind of things have been added. Highways are being used for emergency landing. Those kind of every possible factors are being added to the highway development. I think this is it for now, looking at the time constraint. But yes, India, I can only say in a closing remark that India is developing phenomenally on its highway development. Huge investment is happening. Government has a tremendous priority on the infrastructure. Private sector is very upbeat, and India is building good capacity to do that. Thank you, Malika. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vaibhav, for this very impressive presentation of the Indian program of infrastructure, and that we have seen that the rhythm of construction is very, very intensive, and you have also provided some interesting information in order to stimulate the private financing to this project. So thanks a lot. Now we are ready to address some questions. I've seen on the chat button that there's already some question which has been raised, and for one of the points that has been also mentioned by Bruno is about the funding by public that could delay up to 8 years. I've seen a lot of interactions and from the participants, and some people were just asking to all the presenter and also the rest of the participants about this delay of 8 years delays that could be seen if the project is financed by a public, let's say, financing. Do you have other example that could support that statement from Bruno? We've seen on the chat that some people are mentioning 30 years, for instance, in the US, or less than 8 years in Australia. So what is your point? Now I'm addressing to the panelists.
If you allow me, just to explain a little bit where this figure is coming from. This is something that a university has done in Spain, and they have taken all the projects that our Ministry of Transport has on in its bag, and that are foreseen, planned, but they are not built. They saw that we have 32 billion euros to be built, and each year they expend 2 billion euros. So in average is 16 years, and because some can be done very soon, the other very late, as average they took the 8 years of timing. This is where this figure comes from. But it's something that has been done just for Spain. It's a Spanish
case.
Maybe a compliment from France. Yes, I think we have the same kind of value, the same range of value. What is interesting is that we have a live example that will give us experience on that. The state has just awarded a contract 6 months ago for a new highway, which is over, let's say, a rural county in France. And the adjacent part of the same highway was not awarded because of local opposition to concession contracts. And the interesting point is that the one which was awarded, since is the upgrading of an existing road, it will be put in service in early 2022. And I'd be curious to see when the other part will be open to service. I suppose in 8 years, it won't have even started. So a very interesting point in that is also to get the starting point for counting the difference. And sometimes you can see that with public funding project, the starting point is delayed for many, many years. So it's even a greater gap that is appearing then.
Thank you very much, Christophe. Vaibhav or Julia, would you like to add something on that point?
Yeah, I think in India, the same challenge we have been facing, but we have adopted a bit India bit specific solution. So what we are trying to do, the all pre-construction activities before the contract and concession is handed over is done by the authority, by the government, whether it is land acquisition, whether it is clearances, environment, forest, utilities and things like that. So, so our experience in this has been that if government do this everything before handing over the contract, then the execution is much faster. So that has been our experience. So our experience is bit contrary to what Bruno has said.
Thank you.
From Malika, just from our view, the way we see this, it's clearly bringing private financing into public infrastructure may accelerate the construction of projects that otherwise wouldn't have the funding available for many years. And that can be resolved by using a scheme such as availability, where you don't have to give away much more than just the financing for that project with a limited amount of that financing, which is depending on fulfilling or no availability criteria. But at the end of the day, I think that when it comes to bring private involvement, we need to be much more ambitious. And the key here is how we can change, how we can make projects which were rather infeasible, how we make those projects feasible by bringing the privates in beyond what's the financing. But clearly, if the financing is the issue, bringing private financing into may accelerate, and for sure that does accelerate many projects, otherwise wouldn't be feasible for many years, that's for sure.
Thank you very much, Julia. I think we have also one question that is addressed to all participants here. It is true that concessionaire as a whole are not seen really as good, let's say, sectors. There's a lot of criticism, mainly when from public perspective, there is not a clear, let's say, information about how toll rate is set up, and they always, from the public perspective, they always think that concessionaires are just here to get the money, but not really services. So how can we address that in order to somehow to, in some presentation, we had also some information about control, about, indicators. So can you build on that and give us your point on criticism that is addressed and how we can fight that? Can start from Bruno. Can you start, or?
Yes, of course. Just to say that a concession operates a public infrastructure. We are not the owner of the infrastructure. We do it on behalf of the state or of the administration. This is the administration who has to fully control of everything. I would say that regarding toll rates, at least in my country, Spain, the toll rates are reviewed each year based on the average living cost. And so I have to say that some years we have a review negatively the rates. The rates have decreased. So it's something that is not arbitrary. It's something that is regulated by the administration. And but what we say is that it's something that has to be established from the beginning, because it's something that we put inside of financial plans, and we don't really care what is the system, but the system should be very well defined from the beginning and maintain and keep it during the life of the concession. So I would say that currently, at least in Spain, we have a system that it's really automatic, and is not up to us to change the rates.
I think that from our point of view, I think that we should divide now. I mean, when it comes to set the rates, policies in the concession contracts in general, well, I would say not in general, they're always pretty straightforward. So there's not much room for discussion or for different interpretations. So when it comes to the rates, probably just a matter of transparency. But I don't see that we as a private partner, we can do much more than applying what the contract says, with the more transparency that we can about how the rates are fixed and how the rates are determined by the contract. A complete different structure, different story is when you consider the whole project itself, which are projects that normally are by themselves extremely complex and complicated. When it comes from the construction standpoint, when it comes from the design standpoint, and when it comes in that first period of a few years where the project under construction. So that's probably a different matter. But if the matter that we're discussing here, the matter of the fact is that we're discussing about toll fees, I mean, we don't set the toll fee conditions on the concession contracts. And in general, I say, not more than in general, always the rules and the requirements are pretty straightforward, even on those projects where you have congestion pricing, where you have densities, we have average speeds, you have origin destination, you have a different number of variables that set the toll fee. But once again, more than being transparent about how the concession contract requires us to apply those fees, there's not much that from the private side we can do.
Thank you, Julia. Christophe, do you want to add something specifically on controls and?
Yeah, well, I can just stress out that in France, of course, the government has full control of tariff level. There is a general rule that says that tariffs should increase every year for 70% of the general price increase. But sometimes we observe that politicians have a short memory of those rules, and I can remind myself that the minister of charge of finance has said this year that he would likely change the rule to get control back. And the same guy actually had to sign the treaty that was allowing us to raise the tariff. So probably was signing papers without reading them. But the fact is that he has already controls on the tariff in France. It's just that when he's speaking to as a politician, it might seem easier to him to forget those truly things and to say things that people want to hear instead.
Vaibhav, would you like to say something about India?
The only as I said, the toll rates are decided by the authority, but it's fairly defined when the contract is signed, how the toll rates will increase at what point of time, and there has been some ambiguity a few years ago, but from last 5-6 years there has been clear definition about every year how the toll rate will increase, and it has been defined in the contract. The old concession has some of these issues which we are trying to resolve, because they were the quite old concessions where these clarities were not there. But now the new concessions, there is a fair clarity, but the rates are decided by the authority, not by the concession.
Thank you very much. I think I have also a question that is addressed to all of you, but more specifically for the one who has old concessions. Mostly in Europe, there's a contract which are now, let's say, some have expired, some are running but are old. From your point of view, how is the current situation of this old concession will be managed, and what will happen after could you provide us information about contract endings? What will be after that kind of situation from the one who has already experienced that? Bruno, can you start making the point on that?
Yes, of course. In the next, in ASECAP, we have made a study, and we know that in the next 5 years, 7 concessions will end their contracts. In the next 10 years, 11. In the next 15 years, 22, 21. In the next 20 years, 6. So little by little, we will see how much a concession will end their contract. And what will happen, we don't know. I can tell you what has already happened in Spain with 2 concession contracts that have finished. And in that case, the central government decided to take it back and to integrate it in the national road. So they are assuming the cost of the maintenance of these motorways. And in fact, it not only they assume the cost, but they will not have the fiscal revenues that this activity generates. So this is something that it's a way we have to see if there is really value for money in this decision. And I hope that they will change their mind, and in the other European country they will do other kind of decision, because I think it's we have to put the focus on the real priorities of the society, and maybe when we have the chance to have the user pay principle and the polluter pay principles applied, we should apply them when it's possible.
Thank you, Bruno. Who else would like to add something on that about ending of contract and next step, or ideas that could be also details? Christophe, any idea?
Well, as I said in my presentation, I think it's also a challenge for us to provide initiatives that are letting us as important partners for the public bodies. As I said, I think there are many investments which are needed to upgrade our concession in the future. Somebody was asking in the chat if we would move from a click-and-mortar business to a service business. in a way, yes, we won't be mobility operators as such, but I think we can provide new and innovative services that will be added to the infrastructure. And when they will be added to the infrastructure, if they get successful, then they will be needed on other infrastructures as well. So that can be a key for the future of concession contracts, that is funding needs for mobility beyond our own infrastructures through tolling and through concession.
Thank you, Christophe. There is a question addressed to Vaibhav concerning the point you made in your presentation. So you mentioned hybrid annuity models government support, which is 40%. So Snehal is asking, can you elaborate on what is government's roles during the construction, and is it fundings? In that case, how PPPs are submitted?
I'll explain. I'll just take a second to explain the background of how this hybrid annuity model was evolved. In India, there has been between 2010 to 14, a lot of projects got stuck during the construction phase, and then contract went into disputes because of delays and became a lot of distress assets. So with the Indian concessionaires having challenge on equity and who will bear the traffic risk, the construction risk, and things like that. So we derived this a very in a way a bit of India specific model in which the 40% it's an annuity model. So the 100% traffic risk is borne by the government, and the entire money is paid in the annuity. But out of that 100%, 40% of the amount is paid during the construction phase. That's roughly around first 2 years of the contract. So 40% of money is paid during the construction period, and remaining 60% is paid in the equal annuities over the concessional period. Now, the standard practice in the bidding is there is a formula in which the concessionaire is supposed to add on the bank rate, the interest cost, and the profitability. And based on that, he has to bid on the cost of the project. So this has been a fairly standard model that is now working very well in India from last 3 years and has been fairly successful for 2-3 reasons. One, the entire delay that used to happen because of the authorities' inability to get either land or permissions for environment clearances, forest clearances, or delay in shifting of utilities or any delay on the authorities' part, the concessionaire interest is protected, point one. Point two, the traffic risk initially has been taken over by the authority. So this has been a good annuity model where private sector participants are very happy participating.
Thank you for the information provided, Vaibhav. So there's a question to Julia. So some participants are asking, what is the impact of COVID-19 to the I-66 project? Will it be delayed? What has been taken? What action has been taken to fulfill? To be ready for 2022? Will there be any problem for the project?
No, I could say that one issue is how will this affect the forecast for the traffic in the future? But that's a completely different matter of when the project is going to be on a service commencement date, and so far just keep service commencement date as it was expected mid to late 22. And I would say that fortunately the construction crews have been allowed to work in a much quicker, much efficient manner that it was expected due to the lower construction traffic. So I think that so far so good when it comes to the construction period. So if the question is how will this affect to the future on traffic forecast, that's something that we'll have to see when we have this in production. But at the end of the day, we're still keeping the same construction schedule that we have engaged, which is on the 22. So there's no more impact than that one.
Thank you, Julia. Mm-hmm. We have also one question that has been raised about KPIs. One is asking what could be the right KPIs that could be somehow considered as requirement for the end of the concession period. Any ideas from the presenters? From the point of view of
maybe I can start with a guess, not an answer, because this is a very difficult question, which is not resolved in France, at least, for two reasons, I think. First, because of the financial impact of this question. When KPIs are set with levels that are contractually fixed, then it can have a big impact, financially speaking, for the contractor leaving. And then also because we are running very long-term contracts, so it's very difficult, in my view, to decide at the beginning on a set of KPIs that will be still the good ones at the termination of a contract. So the contract that I know in France are not very precise on that side. And I would say that KPIs are built in the process. Every new add-on to the contract is the opportunity for the public body to create new KPIs, and that will build the set of KPIs that will be used in the end to judge the state of the concession and to judge if there is a penalty to be paid by the operator, or some maybe some exit money to be paid because of extra investment that were done.
Thank you, Christophe. Any additional? Bruno, please.
In our contract, what it says is that it stated as that the infrastructure has to be given back to the authority in perfect conditions. That is very generic, no? What we have seen is that at the end of the contract there is an audit of the state of the motorway that is done by engineering company that is being paid by the state, and based on this there is a discussion with the concession in order to see how to improve the motorway and how to finance it. But this is not very explicitly in the contract.
Thank you, Bruno. Anyone would like to add something on that?
As Bruno said, the handing over is a bit generic in terms of it has to be perfectly motorable condition. But there are few things which we have tried in our contracts. One is we have tried to define that after a certain period, kind of relaying and things like have been defined. Similarly, we have a mechanism of an independent engineer. It's an agency consultant who acts as an independent engineer between authority and the concessionaire, and he has to certify the condition of the road. Then only the concessionaire can, in a way, hand over the asset to the authority. So, but as Bruno said, it's a bit vague. KPIs need to be more clearly defined into the contracts.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Uyar, would you like to add something on that, or?
No, that's an interesting question, clearly. And in fact, as many of our concessions were awarded during the period of time between 2010 and 2020, fortunately, we still don't have that problem, as most of the contracts are running for 50 years. But nevertheless, my personal perception about this, and without being an expert on that part of the story, is that the criteria when producing the handback of those infrastructures back to the government is probably a little bit regulated than what my colleagues on the other side of the pond are experiencing. I think that aging of the infrastructure is something which is relatively well known, and IRR and those conditions and KPIs are certainly well regulated when specifying what's going to happen at the time that the infrastructure is taken back to the government. So I don't have the perception that that's a particular problem of our contracts.
Thank you very much, Julia. So I think that there's plenty of questions, and we can see on the chat that they're still coming. So unfortunately, our session today is 75 minutes, Q&A included. So I think we will not take any more questions, but we have the questions, and we had a very fruitful session today. So we will be back to the question, and we will post on the website the answer that will be collected. I would like to thank once more René Moser, the IBTTA International Vice President. Of course, all the presenters. We had really great presenters today, and really sincerely thank all of them. The International Committee for having set up this program of today. And of course, the super team of IBTTA, Christine and Sila and Wanda, for the support they have provided to set up this webinar. So all the questions of today will be collected, as I mentioned, and there will be a wrap-up on the IBTTA website. Some questions were raised during the chat and concerning the presentation. They will be all updated on the IBTTA website. The session has been recorded as well, so you will find it everything on the website. You will be also receiving a survey this afternoon. Please, I encourage you to fill the survey, because the feedback is always welcome to improve what needs to be improved for the future events of IBTTA. So thank you all for having spent your time today. Continue to check the program of IBTTA events, and there will be plenty of them. And the next one will be tomorrow, and with the Cafe IBTTA. And Emanuela Stocchi will be the special guest. So Emanuela is the Director of International Affairs in ISCAT and also Past President of IBTTA. So please mark that on your calendar. There will be another one on the 23rd, messaging and marketing during the pandemic, also very interesting topics. There will be a next IBTTA webinar organized by the International Committee sometimes in the fall concerning GDPR. So always about privacy and also private data. So I encourage you also to attend that. So once more, thank you all. Thank you also to all the participants who joined today. We were more than, in the beginning, more than 150, and at the end, still 100 participants. So thank you all, and take care of yourself, and have a good summer. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much. Thank you,
Thank you.
Malika. Thank you.
all.